God breathed into the mouth of the Adam, and he became alive. We all know that we desperately need air to breathe. And it reminds me of an experiment that was when they had a group of people in a pressurized cabin. And what they did was they gave them simple math problems, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. And then slowly they removed the oxygen from the cabin and see how they were doing. And occasionally they'd always, ask them to fill out the math problems and see how they were. So they took it all the way down as they felt safe, and then they brought it back up to normal air. And so then they asked these people, the people who participated, said, well, how do you think you did in all these math problems? And they said, no problem. We aced it all. Everything was great. Well, then they showed them how they did. That as the oxygen was going lower and lower, their math skills were getting worse and worse. And at the end, they were so bad that they couldn't even write anything. They were just like putting a scratch on the thing. And yet they thought everything was just wonderful. And I thought, that's kind of like how sin is in our world. That it's not as if I wish it was like these readings today where, here's an apple. I know God told you not to eat it, but eat it anyway. Or here, I know you're hungry. Just change these stones into bread and serve yourself. Don't worry about it. Here, just go jump off the parapet of the temple, and don't worry, the angels will save you. Here, all these kingdoms of the earth in an instant, if you want them all, just bow down and worship me. I wish all sin was that easy and simple, straightforward. You can say, okay, nope, that's it. But instead, it's more like that slow, suffocating, less and less oxygen. So then at the end, you don't even recognize what you're doing. Don't even recognize how far you've gone. That's what the problem is in the first reading. When the serpent tests Eve, he asks, well, did he really tell you not to eat from any tree of the garden? And she says, well, that one in the center, the knowledge of good and evil, we can't even touch it, lest we die, and eat it, lest we die. But that's not what God said. He said, just don't eat it. And so she's already putting a barrier between herself and God, letting herself to get enticed into eating that apple and falling away from him. In the gospel reading, we have the three temptations of Christ. And yeah, granted, we can't change stone into bread, but bread was a staple at that time. You need bread. We still need bread to eat. And so, it might not be bread, but this week our staff went to Narcan training, which means that if someone's suffering from an opioid overdose, we know how to do something to save them. And yet I learned this week 2 people died of overdose in our community. Not in our parish, but in our community. And then it's like all the other things that people say that they can't live without. Drugs, alcohol, anything else that we might think of. But even the other stuff. How many children throw a hissy fit if they're disconnected from the internet? How many people cannot stand to be away from their cell phone for a little while? How many things is it that we say that are even caffeine, say that we can't truly live without? Or maybe that's not saying that, let's go throw yourself off the parapet of the temple and the angels will save you. But what do we rely on? Do we rely on our bank account? Do we rely on our family and friends? Do we rely on our own self-reliance or knowledge, intelligence, or industriousness? And finally, do we rely on God himself, placing God first instead of anything else? I mean, whether it's like the temptation to sleep in the morning, the temptation to go to sporting events instead of here, the temptation to do 1,000,001 ways to put us other things and other people first instead of God. It's never that abrupt and blunt as we see it in these gospel readings. And that's why we have Lent. Lent is that breath of fresh air in our lives so that we can try and see clearly where we stand before God. That's why we have the discipline of prayer, because prayer is putting God first. Unlike in the last temptation with saying, worshiping, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world, to put God first by prayer, saying there's nothing more important in my day and my energy than prayer. Then we have almsgiving. And that's the second one. As we give away alms, we're going off that parapet in a sense, to rely that whatever we give, God will still take care of us. That our generosity will not leave us bereft, will not leave us homeless. We will still have all that we truly need. And then fasting. Fasting from those things that we cannot live without, as much as we could not live without bread, or any of the other things we might think in of our lives, that fasting reminds us we're solely dependent on God. In Him alone do we need. The prayer, fasting, and almsgiving give us that breath of fresh air. Instead of slowly suffocating to death by oxygen and the grace being released, instead we're given a fresh breath of new life, so that we can follow Christ ever more closely.